Hello, hello, welcome to Author Hour with Richard Lyntton. I'm your host, Richard Lyntton, author of North Korea Deception, book 1 in the Deception series. North Korea Deception is an international spy thriller set in London, Moscow, Vladivostok, and Pyongyang. But today, my guest is Nathaniel Popkin. He's a writer and editor of fiction, non-fiction, film, criticism, and journalism. He has written 3 novels and 3 other books of non-fiction. The Year of the Return visits bicentennial Philadelphia to tell the story of a Jewish family and an African-American family united by marriage, then by grief. His other 2 novels are Everything is Borrowed, and the very first novel was Lion and Leopard, which examines duplicity and originality among the earliest American artists and was a finalist for the Forward Review's Indie Book of the Year award. We were going to chat about fiction, but I started listening to Nathaniel's audiobook To Reach the Spring, and I couldn't stop listening. In an essay published in the New York Times in 2018, he described the present era of eco-crisis as the age of loss. To Reach the Spring, From Complicity to Consciousness in the Age of Eco-Crisis is his latest work. It's a personal and philosophical and book-length essay, an urgent and deeply felt call to face our complicity in the Earth's destruction. For me, it's a painting, it's a mosaic, it's a book, it's a scholarly work. Nathaniel, welcome. Thank you for coming.
Well, Richard, that was a beautiful introduction. It's so great to be here today.
So blown away by your book. I mean, I know you work in so many areas: fiction, non-fiction, editing, writing, book criticism. But you know, this To Reach the Spring just threw me away. It's called an essay. You call it an essay, but for me, I get kind of scared and a little bit bored when I hear the word essay because of high school and college. So I feel like it doesn't do it justice. For me, it's a great work. It is on audiobook. If you want to listen to it on audio, that's how I listen to it. I think best you describe it for us. Like, what is it? You know, it's about eco-crisis. Tell us about it, how it came about, how long it took you to write.
Absolutely. So this is a book that's kind of generated inside of me for years. As all of us, we're sort of part of this thing that's happening to the earth, but we're also distant from it. We go about our lives. We know this very slow motion disaster is happening. We know we're part of it. We know it's going to affect us and our future generations in very serious and meaningful ways. We know there's something bad about it. Mm-hmm. Evil, unjust, menacing, but we don't really know what to do. Right. And we don't live, we live under a kind of like political economic apparatus that distances us from having too much, immediate effect on our lives, right? Mm-hmm. So what do we do? What can I do is really what I was thinking. Okay. And I began to think about what is the quality of this feeling of total, of having really no agency, of being able to only observe and not make sense of it. And so that's where this book came from, a desire to face my own complicity, mm-hmm. to think about the moral implications of contributing to something that's immense and menacing and almost evil in its scale, that's going to affect people I love or people I don't love, and everyone, but not having enough sort of agency over how to stop it. And that kind of moral conundrum is at the heart of this book. And I began to think about, how can I think about this? And so this book is, the way I think about it is, it's a book about and I sort of inviting readers to come to think with me about how to think, mm-hmm. about how to face the ecological change that's happening. Before I came into the studio, I was looking at the New York Times, and there is a map that changes over time, and it shows North America, the temperatures in North America in each era compared to the 20th century average. Mm-hmm. The speed at which that has changed in our lifetime even since we became adults. When you and I became adults, we were still living in an era when the temperatures were more or less equal or a little bit more, and sometimes colder than the 20th century average. Since then,
Right.
the map goes red.
Right. So was this, did you plan to write it as one big book, or was it sort of putting essays together?
I think that I planned it to be one book, and I began and I wrote. Mm-hmm. And I sat there. It was one September, October evening in 2018, and it was very warm and muggy. There was a hurricane in the south, and that weather system had come up here. We have big doors that were open to the street, and it was just, you could feel the moisture, and it was a strange night where again, I use that word menacing. It felt like there was something wrong. Yep. And that's when I started to write.
And what I love is the way Nathaniel, first of all, much of it is a letter to his would-be grandchildren, which I think is really fun and a nice way of doing it. And I also love that it's just not boring, like essays, scholarly works, academic works. I don't read that stuff. But the way you've done it is just so beautiful. I mean, I just want everyone to read it. I want everyone to look at it. You quote European painters and writers and philosophers. I mean, I feel kind of a little bit in awe because I was like a B minus, kind of B plus, A minus kind of. I feel like you were an A plus plus in high school.
No, so that's clever. Not true. But it's funny that you say like the word essay scares you from school, yes, right? And of course, that reminded me that was so true. Right. Nobody wanted to have to read or write an essay, but the essay form is this amazingly flexible literary instrument. Mm-hmm. And in fact, one would say my second novel, Everything is Borrowed, was a kind of essay. Mm-hmm. Embedded into a fictional form, but the essay form allows you to range, mm-hmm. allows you to think, envision, and for this, wanting to find ways to talk about this issue that we have a lot of mm-hmm. trouble discussing. Yep. Because we don't know how to talk about it. I looked to poets from, the U.S., Iran, Europe, China. Right. It's incredible. And philosophers from all over. I looked to historical precedents like the bubonic plague, the Holocaust. I looked at contemporary philosophers. So sort of like put your hand into a bag and pull out what you get.
And when you say you did all that research, so how long were you researching it? I mean, is this like over a lifetime that just your favorite works that you used? Because there is so much there, I just couldn't believe it.
Well, there's a couple things that I've been playing along with for years. The form of this book is directly inspired by The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin. Okay. Which starts with a letter to his nephew, Jimmy. And it kind of helped me conceive of the form. But
Can you just tell our audience about that book real quick? Because I have not read that.
That book is the most remarkable treatment of race in America, from a personal, but also philosophic and also literary and anecdotal quality to it, mm-hmm. in language that is both piercing but also disarming. Yeah. And it's in that work, I think, that Baldwin most clearly makes it, reveals to the reader that racism is of as much harm, or if not more harm, to the white perpetrator of it than to the black person who is receiving it. Mm-hmm. So this is a remarkable thing that I've read for years. Another work in this book is Italo Calvino's Invisible Cities, is another work that has like stuck with me forever. There's a particular passage from that book which I quote in here, but otherwise, the thing about when you're writing an essay, you're ranging around and you're looking for places to go, and you find them as you write.
And again, don't be put off by like the sort of the names or philosophers that you may not have heard of or read, because that's the point about this book, is that you take us there, and it's so fascinating. Did you want to say something?
Well, I was going to say there are a bunch of contemporary theorists on this issue of global warming and planetary emergency and climate crisis, like Donna Ann Haraway and Timothy Morton, the philosopher at Rice University. And most readers will not know these people. And that's one reason for taking their work out of the kind of academe and bringing it to the general reader in a way and integrating it into a larger structure.
The question about the research. So how many years of research would you say this is?
I think I started, so this is an issue, so the environment, the poisoning of the environment, the injustice of environmental degradation. And that's how I feel about it. It's kind of an injustice to the earth, but also to humans. And we're injuring the earth just as we're injuring human beings by the actions that we take. I was an environmental activist at university age, and then into my early adulthood, I worked as an environmental activist for a while. But then after 15, 20 years of a career of writing, I sort of began to turn back to it, and I wrote a series of essays, including the one you mentioned in the New York Times.
Okay. And
it was in that process that reconnected me to the present day scholarship and thinking and writing on the subject. It brought me into these works that I hadn't read before. And I participated in a residency in southern Chile with a bunch of contemporary artists whose work requires them to observe, research, and make sense of, process environmental change.
And how long was that? How long was that course? When you went to?
That was a month.
So that was a month.
Yep.
So I'm just trying to get, because this one of the things about this show, we're trying to tell people your writing process. So I'm still sort of fascinated by it. So you gather physical books, as it were, on your bookshelf after all these years. Then you said you started writing this book in 2018, or was it earlier? So then you've got all these books, and you've got all this lifetime experience, and there's just so much in there. We can't get into, but you're canvassing. I loved all that story, how you canvassed all those years and the trials and tribulations there. But anyway, so 2 years. So you start writing. How many hours a day did you write? What kind of a writer are you? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's good. I started writing this in 2018. I wrote a draft from beginning to end. I went to that residency. I worked on it a little bit more. I learned a great deal.
How many hours a day are you writing?
From probably 6.
6.
In the
morning?
Yeah, over my career, I'm a very disciplined writer. So, when I'm working on something, I'm hacking at it.
Right.
And for years, doing all the different things that I've been doing required me at times to get up every day at 5:30 and write.
Okay.
I'm not great late at night, though if I have to be, I will. So I drafted this. I presented it to my writers group.
Okay.
I got their feedback. I sent it out.
So how long did it take you to draft the whole thing?
I bet a couple months.
Only a couple of months. Wow.
Well, it's short.
Right.
And it's meant to be short.
Yeah. And then you hand it over to them. And okay, but then you are a writer. You've written fiction, and you write essays and you write for publication. So you're writing this tome, as it were, for want of a better word. Are you doing other writing at the same time, other writing jobs? So just talk us through your day. I mean, just trying to get that kind of detail, because it's really interesting. I just don't know how you do it. I mean, I like to get up early because there's no emails and,
Yeah.
So then you've got 3 or 4 hours, say, or you tell me, your writing day. And then how do you fit all the other stuff in, and how long do you do that for?
I don't know. My day becomes very fluid. Mm-hmm. So I may be working on a film project. I might be, when this book came out this year, and in the 2 years before that, from 2017, including this book, I produced 4 books, and also made a whole lot. And for the last 2 years, I've been working on a huge film project. The year I wrote that film, I spent rewriting a documentary film called Sisters in Freedom that was that is once in a while on PBS, and I don't know. I just do one thing, and I just fit. It just all gets integrated, and very often for me, my work gets integrated. So sometimes I'll be working on the same subject, the same theme, the same historical path, the same set of issues in fiction, nonfiction, film, in an article. Like, once I get stuck on something, it gets manifest.
Are you working
throughout.
like 12 hours a day or more?
Sometimes, but I have for sure.
Do you take a day, one day off a week when you're on that kind of pace, or not really? You like to work every day?
I work a lot.
I always say when you go on vacation, that's work for me. Like learning to do nothing on vacation or on a beach in Europe I just can't do that. How do you find that? Going on vacation, or if you...
there have been times over the last 15 years where I've worked really, really hard. I've started a lot of projects. I've been involved in bringing them to fruition. Sort of public cultural projects, and then I've sort of gone on vacation and just crashed, right? But also most of the time as a writer, you're never off because you're always thinking. And if you wake up between 4:30 and 5:30, before you're awake, but just going, like that's the best gestation of material for me. Too often I just go back to sleep, but once in a while I'll like make myself remember something.
So what is your, I feel like you've got all these options and you've been doing this for many, many years. What is your favorite, like if you had a choice, would you be writing fiction, would you be writing nonfiction, or you'd still be doing everything?
It's a great question. And one reason I do so many different things is as a hedge against failure, or perceived failure, or lack of ability to advance all of one thing where I want it to go. So, I do a lot of different things because, well, for one, I think of myself as a writer, not a novelist. And for two, I'm interested in a lot of different things, and I'm involved and engaged in a lot of different things. So I don't know what to do with that. I'm not quite focused enough.
So is it fair to say you're in writer's term, you are a jack of all of writer trades and master of none? Is that how you see yourself?
I'm certainly a master of none.
I mean, I think you are. I didn't mean it like that. But
no. I that's the truth.
I didn't get to read the Year of the Return, but I did start it. And a quick question about that. It's kind of an interesting format. Like, it's, again, I don't know how would you even describe it? It's like a diary. It's like the first person's perspective that when you switch characters. Can you just talk about that? Because it is an interesting topic. If you can just again explain the reason I chose it is because it's set in Philadelphia. Just tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many ways to tell a story, and there's so many ways to play with genre. And fiction allows us to do that. Fiction is fiction. That means it's just invented. It doesn't have to be, a thriller is one form, but the form, I mean, you can tell a story from a sort of distant third-person narrator. You can tell a story from a close-in third-person narrator. You can tell a first-person perspective, or even sometimes a second, or switch, or incorporate other elements. Everything is borrowed as a novel incorporates real lives, as does Lion and Leopard. I mean, historical characters. I mean, one of the protagonists in Everything is Borrowed is based upon, not is. It's invented. A real person, and I was able to access his health records and his death report, all those kinds of things. In this book, not based upon anyone really, particularly, The Year of the Return, it is told in that format where there are maybe, 12 characters, and they alternate voices. I like this form because I like reading William Faulkner. I don't know, it's just like...
Right into that one voice. And
I mean, I think inhabiting a voice fully, you lose a lot of agency as the writer. You give it up to that voice, and then it's up to you to bring the voices together in a way that will make sense. I mean, you have to give the page over to the character's voice, otherwise if you're stepping on that voice, you're not letting that character speak.
Were your first two novels in that format?
Lion and Leopard was partially. There was a first-person narrator, different, and then a bunch of characters who alternated. And then Everything is Borrowed is, I think, a third person, I don't even remember, sort of, no, I think it's a first person point of view narrator.
Right.
And this is completely alternating all the way through. But it's, and I mean, there's bizarro characters in that book too.
Right. I want to switch back to some meat of To Reach a Spring again, because it really struck me. I remember when I was 18, reading Max Frisch's Andorra about collective guilt and Nazi Germany basically. But then I served in Bosnia, and I spent a year in Russia, and I began to see lies, black and white. How government versus people. Bosnia again, lies, propaganda. And then even recently, to be frank, in recent political times, I feel like we're not talking about issues and policies anymore. We're just talking about truth and lies. It's crazy. But if you could just talk about the thing that you talked about in your book about the Nazi thing, the collective guilt thing, because people say, what's he talking about? He's written a book on eco-crisis. If you can, I would love you, because we only have about 5 minutes left, but I would love you to just talk about a little bit, because I found that fascinating.
Yeah, so the Holocaust plays two roles in this book. And again, I'm looking for ways to think about this. So the first way is that I look at Hannah Arendt's work on the banality of evil. So in her work, she's looking at the trial of Adolf Eichmann, and she's saying, well, he's kind of just a regular German guy, and he didn't say anything that was like, I wanted to go out and murder people. He kind of went along with the regime.
Right.
And in doing so, did some extraordinarily evil things.
Right.
And then she drew that back towards the German people who went along. In the banality of the everyday acquiescence to evil, they knew what they were doing, and they went along. And so she created a kind of apparatus for thinking about that type of complicity. The second way in which, and in that sense, in that sense, that is what we're doing.
Is it fair to say that complicity you've just talked about, you're kind of saying this is what's going on with the eco-crisis? I don't want to put words in your mouth.
This is correct. There are 2 or 3 billion human beings on Earth who are responsible for eco-crisis. And then maybe there are like 2,000 people who are running these big investment funds and fossil fuel corporations and all of that who are really, and governments that are complicit, who are really the culprits here. But for those of us who are so deeply embedded in the consumer world, we're complicit, and we have to face that.
Right.
And real quick, the second way the Holocaust matters in this book is that Primo Levi was in Auschwitz. And in the deepest, darkest winter of 44, he looks around the camp and everything is dead. There's machinery, which is the machinery of death, and that machinery has obliterated nature. As soon as spring comes, he looks across the street and he sees a forest or a meadow, and he connects with that. And that thing, even if it's February or early March, 45, gives him hope about life. And that restores his hope for life. And that, again, is this kind of metaphor that I use with the Holocaust.
And I think you beautifully just explained why I love this book so much. It is so sort of accessible, and that's why I call it it's like a painting, a mosaic. I just think you have to read it, guys, and your teenagers and your students have to read it. So we have a couple of minutes left. Just what advice do you have for, well, two-part question. So someone like me who's just starting one book out, working on my second book, let's start there, and then I want to ask you what advice you would have to someone who just thinks, I really want to write. So just those two types of people, two types of writers.
Well, I think you know what the thing to do for the work that you're doing. For I mean, look at this. You did this, right? And you understand that you have to have a platform. You have to, and you, as we talked before, the writing is a certain percentage of this.
Do you agree with my percentages?
Well,
I was saying 35% is the writing of the book, even though that took me 8 to 10 years to write my 2 books. But I say 35% writing, and then I say 70% marketing and platform. Do you agree with those numbers?
That's probably true.
Roughly?
I mean, it's probably true.
Yeah.
And there is a big difference in the world of literature that is meant for commercial consumption, which I believe this is.
Absolutely.
And other kinds of literature, whether it be poetry or literary fiction or whatever, that's not.
Right.
But I would still say what really matters is the work. And I would say to you, and I would say to that person that's just starting out, ask yourself why. Why? Why do you want to do this? What is it that's dying to get out? And follow that.
Really great. Yeah, and that helps a lot, because I know my first book, when I visited that area of Vladivostok, Khabarovsk, in fact, where there's demonstrations now in Russia, just being in China, North Korea, and Russia, that just being there, this was 20 years ago, and I just said I've got to write a book about set in this place one day, and it happened to be commercial fiction, but crazy blowing up nuclear reactors. But anyway, so I agree. I was passionate about that place called the Tumen region, Tumen River, Tumen region, and then my other book was about Bosnia, which is I spent 5 years in Bosnia during the war. Bosnian Serbs, Bosnian Croats, Bosnian Muslims killing each other. The West trying to intervene. I mean, and the chaos and the lies, and anyway. So I love that. What about someone who is just starting, just thinks, I want to write? Do they start writing a diary? Do they just, what advice would you have for those people?
Yeah, it's a really tough thing. A lot of people don't want to share their work at all, ever. It takes a long time to get over that fear of hearing back people's feedback. I would say to that
feedback important, right?
It's extraordinarily important.
Yeah.
But every person is different, and so every person wants to judge when it's right for them to do it. I would just say write. My dearest friend, whenever I've gotten stuck or just totally defeated, he just says, "Write, baby, write."
Right.
And that's it.
Beautiful. I love it. Do you read your work out loud always, or always?
Yes.
Yeah. Several times, or just like the one time when it's pretty much finished?
Usually when it's pretty much finished, but always.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And then what else was I going to ask you? What's next? Like, what's coming up?
Oh,
You're working on
there's lots of yes. I have
stuff.
3 or 4 projects going right now,
Right.
and I wanted to just say, this is sort of not what's next, but magical things can happen, and I did record this book for audio.
Great
I
job.
did it in the studio where Toni Morrison recorded her novels.
Wow.
And I sat in a chair in
Wow.
the studio where she did that for years.
Beautiful.
All of these books. And so when you do things like this, really magical things can happen that you don't ever expect.
Yeah, because we wouldn't be talking about your book probably unless you'd done the audiobook. And I do encourage people, it's another thing that you can think about when you write, is record your stuff. Put it on YouTube. I mean, it's just like so easy nowadays. Anyway, so thank you so much, Nathaniel Popkin, for joining us today for a fascinating conversation. You can find out more about his work at www.nathanielpopkin.net, and I do need to encourage you to see the extraordinary range and depth of his work. I'm your host, Richard Lyntton, author of North Korea Deception. This is book 1 in the Deception series. And again, North Korea Deception is an international spy thriller set in London, Moscow, Vladivostok, and Pyongyang, available in all formats on Amazon.com and around the world. Thank you so much for joining us.